Diversity and Inclusion, prepared for and presented at the 2018 Square One Entrepreneurship Training Program. Square One is a program of the Center for Emerging Technologies. CET is an affiliate of the Cortex Innovation Community. Square One is funded in part by the Missouri Technology Corporation.
Diversity and inclusion. Sounds really boring, right? You're like, ah, how many times have I heard this? Yes, be diverse. Yes, that means also be inclusive. But here's the thing. When I was organizing this and Christy asked me to put this on, I was like, you know what? I come from a mindset and a background where I kind of know this stuff already, but let's not make that assumption. I didn't want to like come in and say, oh, okay, well, you know what this means, you know what this means, blah, blah, blah. So the first portion of this is to kind of get everybody on the same page. Are we cool with that? Okay, awesome. So some of you are going to be like, yeah, I know this already, which is great. Some people may not, but now you can have a conversation about it. So it's all good. Networking, relationship building. All right, so a little bit about me. That right there was, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Webster University's theater program, but they do like popular theater covers. And one of them was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? So the Diversity Awareness Partnership at St. Louis, which actually looks to basically do a lot of diversity training, decided to do this kind of theme where they had a bunch of interracial couples come in and take pictures and kind of give a little short thing about our stories, and it says, we're pretty much like everyone else, which basically is true. We fight and all that good stuff. So at that time, we were together 5 years. Now we are together 9 years. Yeah. So some of you may recognize. Gentlemen here. So the long and short of it is that I participated in a program called Launch Code that started in about 2014. And I got into, like, after they had been up and running for about 6 months, a bunch of teachers were telling me you should do this program. So I was like, whatever, crap it, I'll just do it. Long story short, I ended up filming myself talking about being a part of this program. And I'm thinking, you know, just talking about it, blah, 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 blah. Well, apparently this film made it around all the way up to the White House. And this gentleman here saw it and said this would make for a great national program, whatever program this young lady is a part of. So I was asked to fly out on a Friday to meet with President Barack Obama on a Monday while he did a speech about me and decided to launch this program. And I think they threw like $100 million at it and made it nationwide and base it off of the St. Louis model. So I got a chance to take a picture with him. I did intentionally make sure that I was there. Yeah. How did you post the video? Where did I put the video? Oh, it's on my website.
No, but how do you see it? Was it on LinkedIn?
Was it on LinkedIn? I don't know. Actually, Byron August, who was the Deputy Economic Policy Advisor at the time, saw the video and then showed it to President Barack Obama. And I guess things like that just happen because he was looking for another way to kind of do more progressive things. The economy was not doing that well, especially with tech and getting more people funded and into jobs. And this was kind of a way that Byron saw that we can maybe change that landscape and tapping some non-traditional students along the way. And so I became like a poster child. This guy, some of you may or may not recognize, that is Patrick Stewart, also known as Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise, NCC 1701D. And thank you. Also Professor X, and an all-around good guy. He was out for women's rights before women's rights was starting to become another thing to be out for. And I had a chance to see him at a comic convention. So I drove 11 hours to Dallas from here and put on that shirt and almost fainted right before I got up to him. he wasn't supposed to actually touch anybody. He actually had a cold that day. So he saw me and he's like, hello. And I said, hello. And he just came and like opened up his arms for me to hug him. So I walked right on in and took that picture with him. So, but these are kind of a few things about like how kind of weird and kooky my life is. So I've been in a lot of different areas and had a lot of different exposures. Before the business that I run now, which is L.M. Lewis Consulting, I'm also CTO of Multipass, which is it's a company that seeks to network together different co-working spaces. And also I'm the Director of Aerospace IT. I have to remember it because it's a longer name, at a startup called Astral AR, which incidentally actually is one of Arlen Hamilton's portfolio companies. So I do a lot, but before then I actually ran 3 companies, so I kind of have a lot of experience as far as dealing with LGBT community. Also, I had a LLC that was a management company. I had a neo-soul duo that I managed as well as a burlesque duo, and that was before burlesque was really a thing, so that was kind of very interesting time for me. I have some good stories. We will have to talk off camera about them. And actually now I still do IT consulting, and I have since 2004, and that's my particular company, L.M. Lewis 517. But through the meeting of Launch Code and President Barack Obama, et cetera, I kind of go out as this spokesperson to promote that company as well as equity. One of the things that we decided to do in this picture is Code with Pride. It's actually an affiliate program within Launch Code. And we were doing it because a lot of people felt like Launch Code was not as inclusive as it could possibly be. So we decided, what if we had these affinity programs that were targeted towards LGBT community, towards women, towards African American population, and have programs that were just specific for those populations so that they felt like, okay, this program is all about me too. So that was during the launch of Code with Pride. I also write for the St. Louis American, so for some of you that pull out the paper every now and then, you'll see my name is there, and yes, that's kind of a thing that I'm doing in between the other jobs that I do. But my slant on it is that tech wasn't as present as I would have liked, so I decided to do a little bit to actually promote tech within the African American community. And another thing that I wanted to also make sure was diverse and inclusive was the March for Science that was in 2016. I was part of the original organizing committee, and we had about 20,000 people show up to march for that March stand, 2017. So within everything that I do, I try to always have this D&I slant. With writing for the American, I noticed that there wasn't enough tech going out into the people of color community. With Launch Code, I noticed that there wasn't enough LGBT presence. With March for Science, I noticed that there wasn't really an inclusive collaboration there. And these are other more fun things about me. I received a college scholarship when I was 10 years old, had my first job at 14. And some of you that know me know I'm a NASA fanatic and a Star Trek geek, and I've only had bunnies as pets, ironically. So yeah, like every pet that I've ever had has been a bunny. There he is right there. He's my sunshine. And this may or may not play, sometimes it does, there it is. He loves apples, so anyway. But the reason I'm showing you all of these things, you're like, this is great. You showed me a lot about your life. Your bun's real cute. But what are we gonna cover today? The point is that you probably didn't think all of those things were a part of me when you first saw me stand up here, but they are. And I am probably your customer, but you probably didn't know or think about that. So what I wanted to do was first make sure that everybody got on the same page. Let's do some quick D&I definitions. Let's have some charts to visualize everything. let's talk a bit about intersectionality, which is every person sitting here is more than just one thing. There's the view that you have on the outside, and there's other things that are part of you. Why all of this above here is important, why all of this even matters, and an exercise that you can do on your own. And you'll see when I actually have the exercise that I wanted to put it at the end, because what happens is people tend to do the exercise in the middle of me doing a presentation, and then I see eyes down on a laptop, and I'm like, no, no, no. I still have things I want to talk about. How many people know about the alphabet soup, LGBTQIA? Okay, who can tell me what each of these letters mean? Go ahead.
I just want to say, but I mean, I might be wrong. My son gets on me. He's transgender.
Okay.
So I'll let somebody else.
Okay. Somebody else? I could do like Keisha, and I can just pick somebody. Lamar?
I can get all the way to Q.
Okay, let's try. I mean, hey. Go ahead.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans.
Uh-huh.
Queer. Okay, queer.
You're doing good. Intersex, okay. And asexual.
What was the I again?
Intersex. Yeah, there's an old terminology for it that I don't want to use because now it's considered a slur, but it means that you biologically have both reproductive organs, both sets, major sets of reproductive organs, male and female. Plus is anything that's not necessarily included in here. So there are other offshoots that we're learning as we go along. And the plus is to hold space for those people. So you did real good though. Look at you. Usually when you hear this, it refers to an entire community. So even though you might only hear people say that and say someone's in that plus, we still mean the entire community. And a lot of times we shorten it to LGBT because we're not crazy. We know that's a lot of letters to say. It's a mouthful. But here's the important part. People choose to identify themselves. You don't go out and say, hey, that's John. John is gay, blah, blah, blah. You let John go out and identify himself. You let Jane go out and identify herself. And people like me, I've been out of the closet so long that once you shake my hand, you probably already know. But, it's more traditional to let people identify themselves. Pronouns are important. If someone says, oh, go ahead.
That is very important. My child beat me into a frenzy with those pronouns, and I'm like, I had you. I made you. I know you, but yeah, the pronouns are very, very important.
Well, tell me about your experience with pronouns.
Well, my son came out as gay when he was 19, and real pretty, just pretty girl. Just guys were knocking at my door, beating them dead up. And it was just like, he was just like kind of not into him, whatever. And he came out, he said, I want to tell you I'm gay. I said, are you for real? Are you for real? Because I used to be what they call a fag hag. And you know what I'm talking about. That's
right, I do.
Whole terminology for women that hang out with gay men. So anyway, I said, now if you're really gay, don't play with it. I will support you. So then he said, okay, well, I just want to let you know I'm transgender. I'm a man, I'm a woman in a man's body. No, a man in a woman's body. And I was like, what the fudge brownies? Are you serious? And at first I just thought it was something he was going through. But then as time going on, I would go back and call him his old name. His birth name rather. And she would just, he would just get, and then it took me a while. But I had to see that, it was like a matter of respect.
Right.
If they ask you to respect that, you respect that. Because people in my family are still not respecting it. And they did the worst things my son has ever done. Not like it was a bad thing to be transgender, because you don't choose that. But I'm just saying, it's just unbelievable. And it is, some of them still want the old school. I know you guys so. So it is very important to make sure that, you identify them by, pronouns that they ask you to identify in that. Because they're going to be working with you. They're very smart people, just like anybody else. And their lives are just exactly like ours. It's no difference.
Right.
They're just not into the gender thing a lot of the times like we are. They look at themselves more of a spirit, having a human experience, which we know is that. They're more identity, identify with that more. So I don't know if that's good.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Thank you. So, see, more things that you find out about other people that are around you. So that means there's more things you're going to learn about your
And let me
customer.
tell you, I don't think you guys knew that about me, did you? Did you guys know I had a transgender son? You guys didn't even know that, did you? This is
No.
the first day I've ever, actually, I'm not supposed to make the best person I ever told you.
Thank you for sharing it, because sometimes that is very personal for family. See, that's a mom right there. My mother would say the same thing. Don't. Go ahead.
I knew kind of about your situation from the get-go.
Uh-huh.
But I saw something in one of the pages that makes me feel like I've been addressing you in the wrong way. Do you also go by Sean?
I do go by Sean, but it's because the funny story that I tell people is that if you want to catch my attention, you have to use the name that my mother used in the house, which was Sean. So otherwise, I will not think that you're talking to me. I will just be somewhere. If I hear Lashana, a lot of times I think people are talking about something that I did or whatever, and I tend to like tune them out. So, but yes, thank you for asking. I use Sean just as a nickname, but I tell people it's a lot easier and it's only one syllable. So, go ahead.
I was just wondering also if we could be more explicit in the meaning of pronouns. I just don't want us to like miss
Okay.
what the use of pronouns.
That is
would be
fine.
helpful.
That is
Yes.
fine. I am here to adjust. So with the use of pronouns, we know about the regular male, female pronouns, he, she, sort of pronouns, but there are other pronouns that are out there too that a lot of people may not know about. Zir, they. And the funny thing is that people make a big deal about they, but we use the singular they all the time. It's like, oh, I met a person at the store and they blah, blah, blah. You know that I'm talking about that same singular person. Nobody's confused about that sentence. So there are some people who've decided to use they. A lot of the people that I've seen personally that use they happen to be non-binary, which means that they don't necessarily hedge towards the masculine or feminine side of the scale. They're somewhere in between.
And
Go ahead.
There is, just to let you know, there is a group of people in California, when I was out in Southern California, they had a child.
Mm-hmm.
They do not use she, she's a girl.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't have a gender, she's not born with the organs of both. However, the parents are getting into this thing out there where they're not into calling their child a he or she, period, and they haven't even identified the child as being,
Right.
in the LGBT community or not.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all kind of different things coming on now where people are making a decision when they have babies, and they're not even gay,
Right.
or they're not really a part of that community. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, there are parents now that are technically not trying to hedge towards traditional methods, is what I call them, of masculine or femininity. They're just like, if my child likes to play with dolls, they like to play with dolls. If they like to play with trucks, they like to play with trucks. I'm not going to give them a specific toy because of what their perceived gender may be. So when it comes to pronouns, a lot of people will, and I say this with a lot of love and some knowledge, but most people aren't dumb. You see me, the type of figure of person that I am, you would assume female. And you would assume to use female pronouns around me. I would know that. So if I were to say to you, oh, you used the wrong pronoun, you'd feel kind of off, like, okay, well, I didn't know. And most people know, like myself would know, if I wanted to use male pronouns to say, my pronouns are he and him. And sometimes people wear little buttons. It depends on the kind of atmosphere you're in. Sometimes I've even seen it with emails. People are now putting on the emails what their pronouns are because it makes it a lot easier right off the bat. Say you might even have a gender neutral name. Some people might not even know. So it's kind of something to put out there. Go ahead.
I go to St. Louis University, and, and all of the emails from any of the staff at our university, they put their pronouns in the bottom of the email.
It's a great starting point. Don't feel obliged that you have to do it. Lamar, if you don't want to greet me and say I use male pronouns or whatever, you know, that's fine. If I use male pronouns to refer to you, as long as you don't correct me and say I'm supposed to use female pronouns, then, you know, if I'm using male pronouns, it's fine. But the thing is that you kind of have to let the person define to you what the pronouns are for themselves if they're incorrect or could be perceived as incorrect, as opposed to just saying, you know, well, you look like a woman to me, so I'm just going to keep using female pronouns. There are people that have said that, and I've been witness to it, and I've just been like, yeah, this is not going to be a good conversation. It's not going to go down well. So it's more about being perceptive. I don't want people to be afraid. That's the thing that I don't want you to get out of this, is that you're fearful that you're going to offend someone. I tell people it takes a lot for you to offend me. You have to literally be calling me all sorts of out of my name, and it's in the middle of, you know, me and my family meeting or something like that, in some sort of high anxiety environment. Most people aren't very easily offended if you use the wrong pronouns. They may say, you know, oh, actually I use male pronouns. Oh, actually I use female pronouns, and then that's it. If you make a mistake, you'd be like, oh, I'm sorry, you know, I said he and I should have said she. And a lot of times most people are like, okay, because they know that you're being sincere about it. It's when you're being curt and trying to force yourself and force your own beliefs on someone else that it ends up kind of coming off as this kind of deterrent to furthering conversation.
It's broadly extremely rude to ignore explicit feedback on how to address someone.
It is.
It is.
I mean, like if, what is your name?
Alex?
Alex. So say that you went by Alexander, and I said, blah, 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 Alex. And you were just like, no, 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 my name is Alexander. You would probably feel offended, like, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do if I just continue to call you Alex, because that's what I want to do.
When you
So,
demonstrated intent, which is often like the substance of offending people, if I told you my name and you sort of purposely said something different, that's often when people get really mad at you. Just in, like, very generally.
generally it is, but sometimes people can be unintentionally curt about it, because they are so much into their world or their belief system that they don't understand that when you are correcting them in something that is not canon to what they believe, that you're just telling them there's a world outside of what you're used to. So sometimes those conversations don't go well. And I've actually had conversations with people who have told me various amount of things about what they think about black people and what they think about women. And I've tried to correct them, and they said, oh, no, no, my sister's a woman, and da, 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 so I know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, that's great that your sister's a woman, but, you know, just because what you may have going on within your world is privy for you, it may not be privy for someone else. So to always be kind of aware. So yes, there's both intentional dissent and unintentional. So we have to be a little aware of both. Did you have a question?
Yes, so I was raised in California and I wasn't raised with this, but in the corporate space, we had a lot of customers on the East Coast, and ma'am and sir was fairly appropriate in a sales context. Mm-hmm. Is there like a generic term of respect that you could use with someone, or a generic term that you could use when you don't know and you have someone on the phone? I mean, if you're talking to a customer, maybe you haven't met them before, you want to make sure they know that you're being respectful in a professional capacity. I mean, how would you handle that?
I usually just say hi or hello. I just knock off trying to do a ma'am or a sir. Hey, how are you? Blah, 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 and then ask my question. Or I find out what their name is, and I say, you know, can I call you by your first name? Do you prefer your first name, or do you prefer, you know, another way? A lot of times people are very open with telling you what they prefer. I think that what we have is a lot of fear that we're going to offend somebody by doing the wrong thing, when a lot of times people just want to be asked. So that's been my personal experience, and that's coming from about 10 plus years dealing within the LGBT community. A lot of people just want to be asked. So, but yeah. But I understand what you're saying. My family's very Southern. I didn't pick up the accent. My sister did for some reason, but I never picked up the accent. So a lot of the ma'am and the sir and all of that stuff was something understood that we did because that's kind of how we were raised. But because we're running short on time, I'm going to continue on. All right. All right. And what I had here are some terms on homophobia and transphobia. Basically, it's the internalization or the dislike of someone based off of sexual orientation or gender identity or anything within that LGBT spectrum. So with POC, sometimes you'll see that, and I'll kind of go through these quickly, but we're talking more so about people of color. So if you ever see anything referred to that, that's usually what that means. There's also MOC or WOC, men of color and women of color, and that sometimes pops up. With prejudiceness and discrimination, a lot of stereotype and racism, people tend to use those interchangeably, but I like to believe that they actually all mean separate things. Prejudice is more so on a belief. Like I believe in this particular method or that this is the right way to do something. Discrimination is actually acting on it. So you're acting on the thing that you believe about a person or a group or et cetera. Stereotype is kind of the all broad strokes. So it may not just be one person that you are acting on based off of your belief. It may be people who share similar characteristics. And racism is, a lot of people like to think it's just kind of like a thing where I don't like somebody of a certain skin color, but it's kind of grown into this hierarchical system of oppression. So there are a lot of systems that were based to intentionally discriminate against people and to enact their prejudiced thoughts and stereotypes. So we have to remember that it's a lot broader than just saying the N-word, for instance. It's a lot broader than that. It's more about the way systems have been designed to disenfranchise certain people. So when we think about those terms, we think pro or anti, that you're either one or the other. It's like a light switch. You're either pro-gay or anti-gay. You're either an abolitionist or you're a racist. You're one or the other, but it's actually not a switch. It's more like a scale. So what we're looking at is like with pain. We've all been in pain before. We've all kind of had a headache. Are we dying? We might feel like we're dying, but we're not. We're just kind of, pop a aspirin or whatever and you're okay. And then there's, cutting your leg off with a chainsaw. That's on a higher level scale. So just like we're not just either in pain or not in pain, that there's levels, there are also levels within racism and sexism. So here's a scale that I like to pull up because it was actually pretty well done. This was actually done by somebody named Christy Demnowitz. And she did this because she was actually a white woman trying to talk to another white woman about racism and trying to explain how it wasn't a black or white, quote unquote, issue, that it's not an off and on thing, that there are certain levels. So she developed a scale, which she's used tons of times, and actually right now she's doing like a GoFundMe kind of thing to raise more money to get the website up, because so many people have found that this scale is really useful. Here's another thing that I have found online. It's called the racial dot map. It was developed by Dustin Cable. And what he did is he took the census from different areas within the United States and he colorized dots. So one dot per person that was responded to in the census. Black people are green, white people are blue, red is Asian. This is the St. Louis region, that's the Mississippi. This is Shodo, Manchester area. You guys see here this blue right there and how it turns green? Do you see that? You want to guess where that is, where that precipice is right there?
Delmar Boulevard?
That is Delmar. This was done in 2010. This is the 2010 census. So that shows you how stark the division still is. Numbers don't lie. So, until they do. But for the most part, that's kind of really tricky and hard to lie about. So when we came to dispelling these myths about on and off, various people tried to do different things. Here we have the Kinsey scale. And what it did is it tried to rate sexuality from 0 to 6. So they didn't want to see people as either gay or straight. They said that people are a variety. They're somewhere along the scale. You want to guess where most people in the United States are? Actually, most people are between about a 1 to a 5. Most people. There's almost nobody that's a 0, and there's almost nobody that's an absolute 6. Most people fall within that scale. Then they try to kind of break it down more and make it more fleshed out. This is the Klein sexuality grid. So basically, it's the Kinsey scale, just kind of, like I say, on steroids. So it actually breaks things down even further. I don't expect any of you to memorize this. There will not be a test later, so don't worry about it. So obviously, like I said, that there are variations. But what if you're more than one thing? What do we do? So some of you are familiar with the Divergent series. How many of you are geeks like me and have actually watched Divergent? Thank you for admitting it. All right. The way that the society is split up quickly is that you have to fit into one of 5 factions, and that's it. That's what you have to fit into. And then whichever faction, you can either choose one or you're kind of heralded into one, has to kind of hedge towards that. If you don't, you become factionist, and you are kind of like in the more custodial group within society, and you're on the outskirts. But the problem is that they realize that everybody's not one thing. No one is just one thing. But unfortunately, the way our society is handled, you have to choose something. So what happens when people have to choose one thing? They cope. They do things like code switching. How many of you watch Insecure? Okay, you. All right. Do you know who this is? Do you know who that is?
That's Molly. I can't tell who it is.
This was the lady that came in to work at Molly's law firm, the first one. I think
and she was doing a lot. Molly was like, oh, you need to.
Yeah, so this lady here was not code switching. How many of you know what code switching is? Okay, ooh, okay. Code switching is basically what my mother used to call talking like white people. So what would happen is okay, see, now I said it, you know what that is. But basically what would happen is that if an African American is like, hey girl, what's going on? Da, 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 and then a white person will walk in and it's like, hello, how are you? Great, I'm doing good, thank you. And it's like you change your demeanor, you change the way you speak, you change the way you act to fit into a different society that you may be around. So this person did not do that, although Molly was used to doing that. This is called code switching. At the end of the episode, and they actually verified this with the director, this person actually did get fired for not code switching, but actually it was because she did not fit into the culture. Another thing that happens is selling out. How many of you have watched Rent? Just you. Okay. So Tay-Dig's character, the characters in Rent are basically really poor. They don't have any money. And they're kind of living in this boho kind of loft, and they're very bohemian. They're just, you know, living and lighting up trash cans to keep warm and stuff like that. And this person used to be a part of that. And then he got married to someone that ended up owning the building that these other people were in. And then he came back and he's like, oh, we're gonna have to kick you out because you didn't pay rent. And they're like, what are you talking about? You lived with us. You know the struggles that we're going through. And he's just like, yeah, but you know, I'm married and this is the way things are and this is real life and you're gonna have to just deal with it. So in essence, they basically said that this character sold out because he did not sympathize with the people he was around once he changed his living condition. How many of you know about the down low? Yeah. Okay. So basically what that is the, actually, Lamar, did you? Yeah, go ahead.
Expression of your truth is down on.
Right.
If there's anything that you're trying to hide, and you consider that subject information to be on the down low, or DL, as they say, or as some say.
Yeah. In this case, it's people, black men who do not admit their homosexuality at all. They pretend that it's the furthest thing from their mind, when in the background they're actually going and having same-sex relationships and things like that, but they try to hide it in order to achieve the privilege that straight black men would normally have. Passing. And then I think a lot of people have heard about passing, but this is, I think this is Imitation of Life. And this woman is actually black. In real life, she's actually black too. But it tells a story about how she basically denied her mother here in favor for a different life because she appeared as white and gained from those privileges. But basically, that's what happens to people who are forced to choose to be one thing in society. But we've started to do things like recognize intersectionality, recognize things like being woke. I'm going to do this real quick. I love this definition. Brad Pitt is not only woke, but the wokest man in Hollywood, because he uses his status and his production company, Plan B, to create space for artists of color with films such as 12 Years a Slave, Selma, and Moonlight, which I didn't even know that his production company actually supported all of that. But the definition of woke, and you can probably talk amongst other people about it, is basically being socially aware of what's going on and the repercussions that it actually has on different demographics of people. Is that good, Christy? Did I do it?
Make sure folks understand intersectionality.
Sure. With intersectionality, that's basically being able to live within the different communities freely. So if I am black, but also a geek, but also LGBT, I should be able to be all of those things at one time when I'm having a conversation with anyone, and not have to hedge towards one thing or the other for societal reasons. This one I like because I didn't know this. Organizations are now working together to enforce intersectionality. The NAACP and GLAAD, and this is a little bit about both of them. Most people don't know that the NAACP was founded by white liberals and black activists. So that's very important. You might want to look that up later. I learned a lot. GLAAD was founded basically to be anti-slander to LGBT people. At the time, anybody who was LGBT was basically talked really bad about, for the lack of better wording. But in this example, NAACP worked with GLAAD to dispel stereotypes and myths about LGBT people within the communities of color. And this was an effort to help with charges against anti-gay legislation. So that was kind of very cool to see that two major organizations that have been around for a very long time are working together towards one common goal. Also, there are a lot of organizations that have been created as a result. So some of you have heard of St. Louis Black Pride. There's a smaller group called QTPOC. Lesbians Who Tech is actually a STEM conference that happens a couple of times a year that is basically geared towards not just lesbians anymore, but now people within the LGBT plus spectrum. And then you've got NSBE and MCC Church. But all of these are attempts to be more intersectional, to kind of give more of a visibility that there are people who are more than just one thing. They shouldn't have to necessarily choose one organization versus another. There's organizations to help with progress. The other thing is that you're starting to see like publications. How many of you remember when Teen Vogue started talking about things like the gaslighting of America and stuff like that? Does anybody remember back then? Kind of. Well, here's what's basically happened. Teen Vogue used to just be about lipstick and makeup and fashion. And then they decided, because of the political climate, that they were going to change and talk more about the things that were happening that were kind of social justice oriented. So they got some slack for it. They were like, why don't you go back to talking about, you know, this season's color or whatever? And they were like, no, we want to change and talk about things on a social justice platform. So still to this day, you'll see Teen Vogue talk about some things within the political arena. The Riverfront Times actually wasn't going to originally cover Michael Brown and Ferguson. They were actually supposed to publish something else. And when that happened, the editor at the time, Chad Garrison, decided to wipe out whatever he was writing and actually talk about what was happening within our grassroots society here. And that was kind of the first attempt that we saw of a local-ish paper deciding to do more of information about what was going on in the arena, as opposed to just talking about a lot of fluff things. They used to talk about concerts and other stuff, but it was never anything that was social justice oriented. So why am I telling you all this stuff? This is great. Now you're more informed, but okay, yes, you could have gotten this in a diversity training program. Well, here's an article that I wrote with EQ. It's actually out there right now. And it talks about diversity in tech and basically how, because there wasn't enough diversity in tech, some companies really screwed up very badly. So I gave kind of 3 tips towards companies and what they can do whenever they're starting to consider diversity within their realm. The first thing I said was diversify your startup team. It's very, very widely known that if you don't have a diverse team, it's probably not going to cover as big of a base as you possibly could have covered whenever you were designing your product or service. You have to show, as a result, how it's actually going to benefit your customers within diverse markets, not just the one market that you were looking at, but maybe multiple ones. Because the thing is you want feedback from different types of people, because it's easier to cast a wider net than a deeper net. Then you want to seek out investors who want a diverse portfolio. Some people have actually told me that there are investors who purposely do not want to invest in diverse companies. Those are not your investors. You get to say no. You get to say, I don't want you to invest in my product or service. But it's also going to come out in the long run that it's going to be helpful for you. So I said that there was one huge context back here. 3 ways in one huge context. What it basically was racial and gender bias often leads to homogeneous employee base. So all of your employees end up looking exactly the same. So what do you think happens as a result?
You can't ever change. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. That was a good one. You end up getting a homogeneous customer base. So your customers end up looking all the same. So what's the problem with that? You know, okay, you know, my product's only good for one service. Oh. My partner has Snapchat. Guess what happens when the 2 of us try to take a picture together or do one of those little cute filters? It doesn't pick up my face at all. It doesn't matter what light I'm in. It doesn't matter how bright it is. It doesn't pick up my face. And it doesn't pick up my face because the people who were designing the facial recognition technology did not have darker skinned people to test them on, to test their product on. How many people did not know that they weren't using female crash test dummies until 2011 in the driver's seat?
I did not know that.
You did not know that, okay. Everybody else here is like way smarter than me. So, but yeah, look at this, 47% higher chance of serious injuries with female drivers. And it's just because when they did those, you know, nice crash tests that you always see in the commercial, it's always a male dummy that's in the driver's seat, and that's all they tested for. And that's what they passed on. But then when they put in a female dummy, approval ratings went down. So because of that, and because of the amount of injuries they were starting to get, companies started using female crash test dummies. It's really hard to say. Female crash test dummies within the driver's seat. eHarmony was sued in California for excluding gay people. Some people are old enough to remember this. This is February 2007. But basically, it was illegal for you to have a company that discriminated against gay and lesbian people. And eHarmony, or in California, and eHarmony had a company that said, yeah, we're going to discriminate. And then they got sued. And it became a problem, and they actually ended up creating a different platform just for gay and lesbian couples to meet. And then they decided to roll that company into eHarmony. And here's this one, Winn-Dixie. For those of you that's not from the South, that's like a big popular grocery store. So the Winn-Dixie there decided that they did not want to make their website readable for blind people. So basically people who can't see the screen, they have like a reader, and it actually just reads it off. You know, I've actually seen a person do it. And their website didn't allow for that at all because of the way it was designed. So they got sued by a person who was blind who needed to use the Winn-Dixie website to order like prescription medicine or other things. So the funny thing is that after all of the legal stuff was over with, they did the analysis of how much it would have cost them. And I think it was like $20,000 or $30,000 just to update the website versus the many more thousands of dollars that they went through with the lawsuit.
And reputation damage.
Yes, reputation damage. You lose a lot of customers. So why does this matter? Well, we're all just looking for money. That's all we're looking for, right? We want money invested in, we want consumers to use our products. We're talking about purchasing power. We're talking about how much money people have to spend, because that's what we want. We want that from our target market. I looked this up. It took me about half a day to get some of these figures. But when we're looking at different demographics, usually when you hit about here, that's when it becomes like, this is the market that I want to make sure that I'm targeting, because that's the $1 trillion mark. That's spendable money. That's after people have paid their taxes and paid their bills and all of that stuff. That's the estimated amount in the US that that demographic has to spend on your product.
So what is, can you just read off the bars for us?
Sure. This African Americans here was already up here. I think it was like $1.3 trillion when I last checked. We got Asian Americans here that are slowly climbing up to 1 trillion. Hispanic Americans, 1 trillion. LGBT plus Americans, I think it was like 900 billion something, and it's been climbing steadily, especially after marriage equality happened. It just kind of shot up. And then we're forgetting adults with disabilities. They're starting to slowly make that climb. And you got to remember, adults with disabilities also have family members that may not necessarily be disabled, but you know, are kind of roped into this economy. So which one is easier to just go? I think with white Americans, it's about like here. Is it easier to go with one demographic, or maybe try to hit as many of these as you can? It's a lot easier to spread it wide than it is to be narrow. So I said all this nice stuff, and you're like, okay, well, you know, how do I work on any of this stuff? How do I become more aware? Well, I took this test called the implicit bias test. Has anybody ever heard of this before? Yeah, okay. So what it is that Harvard University did this study where they were testing bias, but everybody kind of lies on bias tests because you always want to think that you're more inclusive than you actually are. So they designed a test that basically you can't fool, you can't trick, you can't answer it to make yourself sound one way or the other. This one that I took here at implicit.harvard.edu is free. It's anonymous. You do not have to put in your email address, even though it says it over here. You can actually just click on the link. You can go to social attitudes, and they've expanded it, so now it includes gender and religion and presidents and weight, because there is weight bias, and age. So in this example, I clicked on the one for race, and it's got the instructions. And basically E and I, if you're using it on your laptop, those are like your left and right control buttons on like a joystick or like a game controller. So that's why they kind of emphasize that. It's going to give you a series of words that basically are good or bad words, and then it's going to give you just kind of this snapshot of a face. And that's all you get. You don't get more than that. And in different ways, it's basically going to have you pair a word with good or bad, pair like one of the letters here. So it'll say, okay, E is bad and I is good. And then it'll show you a face. And you have so many seconds or milliseconds to click on whether you think that face is good or bad. And it'll do it in conjunction with a word. It'll do it in conjunction with words and pictures. It's almost impossible for you to really just cheat the system. The first time I took it, I actually had a bias more towards white people than I did black people. And then by the time I took the test the second time, which was a few years later, it was about equal. So it's actually kind of really insightful, and you will learn a lot about yourself while taking that test as far as whether or not you may be biased one way or the other, and it can help you work on more things to be more equitable. These are the ways to reach me. These are the links to contact me. I usually respond with all of these, so that's why I'm giving you these. If you're on my Facebook, you're gonna get a whole bunch of other stuff. But just as a recap, the racial dot map link is here, implicit bias, and my article, 3 Ways in One Huge Context. So that's all that I have for you today. I had to speed through it. Thank you.